Moving on to clarity. It's really important that we try to get that message across. Remember, you got a message, right? Let's give it to the receiver. Let's give it to the reader without making them decode too much of our language. Clarity is all about sharpening that signal. We want high signal, low noise. So how can we accomplish that? One thing we can do is to utilize structure and emphasis, which we've already talked about a little bit. The better that we utilize our structure, the easier it is for the reader to hold on to what we're getting at. Emphasis, of course, is going to put a spotlight on the parts that really matter. But clarity is very much about having an editorial touch. And in this case, one of the most important aspects of that is going to be to cut unnecessary words and phrases. Examples that you'll probably see in any number of papers are phrases like, "It should be emphasized that," "It is interesting to note that," or "as it has been shown." Now, these are just minor transgressions in the realm of being a very clear writer. You've probably included something like this in your own papers, and they can be okay, but they don't add anything, except the possible exception of a word count, and that might be your goal. But we should try to cut down these sorts of phrases and get right at what we're trying to say. If you want to be able to write with real clarity in an effective manner, you must be able to cut. And this can be very difficult because we invest so much in our writing. It's our time, it's our thoughts, and there can certainly be an amount of emotional pain when it comes to getting rid of whole passages that we've written. But in order to deliver that message clearly, you got to be able to cut. Here's a little more about clarity. Let's try to avoid the negative tense. An example is, "His experiments do not often work." Instead, you can say, "His experiments often fail." Once again, this is all about higher signal. If the reader doesn't have to decode negatives, double negatives, and so on, it's going to be more clear, more direct what you're trying to say. Another example, "She did not want to perform the analysis incorrectly." In this case, she wanted to perform the analysis correctly. It's a lot more straightforward. You may be surprised when you start to read your own paper how often these sort of negative tenses tend to show themselves. So if possible, convert them into a, let's say, a non-negative way. I don't know if they're always positive. The valence of the meaning of it could be taken in a number of ways, but to not have the idea of decoding negatives and double negatives, it's going to make those messages clearer. Here's a few more examples you can go through. Does not have, that is lacks. Did not remember, that is to forget. Did not pay attention to, you could think of that as ignored, although that could have some sort of intentionality to it as well. Forgot, perhaps, is also appropriate there. Did not work is a fancy way, or not a fancy way, but a just wordier way of saying failed. Not honest is dishonest. Not harmful, safe. Not effective, ineffective. Not important, unimportant. Try to utilize the shorter versions. Clarify your message. Let's go ahead and practice a little bit. What do you think about trying to make this statement clearer? "We did not remember to read the label to see if the substance was not harmful or not." Already, I hope that your ear's detecting the strangeness in these sentences. How can we make that clearer? Probably about those negative tenses, right? Here's what I came up with. "We forgot to read the label to see if the substance was safe." Clearer, shorter, same message, less decoding. Let's try another. One thing is that Long phrases are not as good as short phrases. And academia is plagued with this idea of just adding in too verbose of passages because it, I don't know, sounds more educated. You can easily think of something like this. This course has a design that allows for the investigation of basic aspects of effective writing in an academic context, using as example exercises that illustrate the methodological difficulties inherent in the pursuit of, I just made this one up, just for fun. And I would like you to do the same. Going against the idea of clarity, going against the idea of good structure, and going against emphasis. Practice the rules, not in the right way, but I want you to fundamentally understand these principles so well that you can work against them. So the negative examples. The assignment is 3 bad intros. And like I said, I'd like you to work against the principles of structure, emphasis, and clarity. Basically, you want to confuse the reader into thinking that you're saying something, but it should actually contain little to no substance at all. There's going to be no actual length requirement, but the longer the better in this case, as you'll be able to just add phrases in as much as you want in a confusing, and this is meant to be sort of fun, so feel free to be semi-comical in it and really just go ahead and try. If for whatever reason you think that you've already written a bad introduction, maybe you want to copy an introduction out of a paper that you've already written, and we can see which of those 3 might be the ones that you tried to write not so nicely and one that you, before you learned about better principles of structure, emphasis, and clarity, had previously done. That's it. Good luck. When we meet in our group meeting, I'll have you guys read these and we'll see which ones really resonate nicely. Let's move on to a little bit more about clarity. If you want more clarity, try to avoid certain expressions that have no clear limits or are in some way very subjective, like a lot. What is a lot? Is a lot the same to you as it is to me? Really? This was really significant. That doesn't really say so much, does it? Slightly, quite, etc. Also things that are considered personal judgments. You may see something like hopefully or luckily, or here in this case certainly, it was nice, disappointing. We were disappointed to not have a better effect. You usually don't need to add that in a scientific context. It can certainly be used in a number of other writing contexts, but for clarity's sake, you want to avoid that in a scientific paper because it has really no basis. It has more of a subjective value instead of an objective value. Try to avoid things that would be considered just straight filler, of course, right? The less filler, more clear. Things like, basically, it was in fact, or in a sense, it was like. Often you can just cut these out completely. It doesn't change the meaning of the sentence, it just changes the word count. But that generally means that it's clearer for the reader. Often we'll add in little catchphrases. You want to avoid those too. For one, the English language is full of phrases, and if you're trying to write to an international audience, you may alienate some people who don't know very specific phrases. Things like, this is on the cutting edge of science, or we're changing the world with our mathematical transforms, or whatever it might be. These sort of catchy phrases can, for the most part, just be completely cut out. If you want to toss one in there to add in some kind of emphasis, all right, maybe, but really try to use this as sparingly as possible. I would even recommend you just basically cut as many of them as you can. A few general writing tips. I had mentioned before, but you don't need to preface every sentence with a word and then a comma, or a dependent clause and then a comma and start right into it. I believe some people have learned that they should do that, and it's actually not a good form of style. It doesn't mean that you have to be extremely sparing when it comes to using phrases like that, but you should really save them. Definitely shouldn't be in every single sentence of a paragraph, unless it's like a two-sentence paragraph. Data is a plural form of datum. So if you have a single data point, then you could say the datum. It's not capitalized though. It's compared with, not compared to. I think most people are pretty good about getting these formulations correct, but compared to something is the correct way to say that. For example, schizophrenia is relatively rare compared with depression. Don't overuse any convention. Don't overuse any particular phrase. It's just like speaking with filler. If you repeat something too many times, it'll start to become really apparent, and then you'll just notice that instead of what someone is trying to say. Does this mean that you shouldn't repeat at all? Not necessarily. You can repeat a message, some important aspect of your data. Just make sure that it's not so often that that's all you're saying. Don't overuse any one convention. Variety is the spice of life. So really try to add a variety of structuring and different conventions within your papers. And don't forget that really there are exceptions to all rules. So if you think, hey, this doesn't fit within this one principle, there's probably an exception to it. Have a read through with fresh eyes, and you'll see if it's a good idea or not. You got to just train that reading and train that writing. So the take-home message after learning about structure, emphasis, and clarity is that there is this thing called the writing process. It's not just that we sit down to write. Focus on the process itself and try to take them in separate steps. The pre-writing phase, the writing phase, or drafting. I like to say drafting because it even kind of says the quality level of it, right? Not a final product, a draft. Just get it out quick. Use your map, use your ideas that you've collected already, and move forward quickly. And then you can revise. Once you've got it all out, then revise. Don't be reiterative. Don't just work the whole time correcting each sentence until it seems like it's a final product. It probably won't be. Get it all down first. Use structure, emphasis, and clarity to facilitate your message, which implies what? That you got a message. Think about the message. Consider the audience who's going to be reading it. Remember, writing can and must be trained. It's like a muscle. If you find it really difficult to sit down and write, you can just give yourself a low word count daily goal. Let's say, I got to write at least 300 words today. That's like a page. Maybe that's too much for you. It's preparation that's key. You don't want to just throw yourself into everything. You might want to warm up. Instead of throwing yourself right into your work, why don't you just write about anything? So you can warm those writing muscles up. So you can get into the flow of just being able to use your mind to go into your work, either typing or just writing stuff out by hand. Have a message. What is it? What are you trying to say? If you can clarify that for yourself, you're going to be able to clarify that for your audience as well. And take the reader's perspective. If you think about, okay, I'm the reader, do I understand what's going on here? Do I understand what this person is trying to inform me about? In the end, the reader's perspective may be the one that counts. They're going to be the one who judge whether your paper is acceptable or not, if they're a reviewer, or accepted by the public. They may be able to give you comments about it after the fact, but as soon as it's published, that's all the chances that you had. Last but not least, my keys to success. Ender's keys to success. You want to get good at this? Write and read regularly. Just in case you didn't know, that's your job now. You're a writer. If you want to stay in academia, there's no way around actually writing stuff. So you got to be able to read and you got to be able to write on a regular basis, keeping up with your topic, but also keeping up with the style of how things are going, keeping up with maybe the trends and the way things are being formatted. Things are changing all the time now. It used to be passive was totally acceptable, and in the last 5 years, it's becoming slowly but surely more vilified. So make sure that you're keeping up on your reading. Make sure that you include writing as a common practice. In theory, you should be kind of writing every day, but you should at the very least be writing once a week, if not. I would even say it would be better if you write every other day. It's best if you can already set aside some time, especially a time when you're really working in a good, efficient manner, to either get some idea generation, some drafting done. So I actually mean the pre-writing, or if you've already done that, to get to some drafting as quickly as possible. Break your work into separate steps. If need be, literally have 3 different hats on board where you can just say, now it's my thinking hat. This is what I use to cluster and roadmap. Take that one off, put another one on. This is my drafting hat. This one is, it's like a hard hat, you know? It's like, I'm just ready to get to work. No distractions, no problem. And then you take that one off and you put on the fancy editorial hat. Now it's time to get to those fine details, polish everything through. Of course, having a message is going to help guide any one of those steps. A message is going to help you structure everything. A message is going to help you push forward as you draft through. A message is going to help you edit. Does it have anything to do with the message? Yes? Keep it. This has nothing to do with the message. Probably cut it. One thing that can really help you be a successful writer is to have somebody else that you can go to for feedback. In the novel writing sense, this would be something like an editor who can give you some notes. But you probably have colleagues and other people doing similar research as what you do now. And it can be a great tool to be able to give them your work and have them give you their work. And you can kind of nudge each other and just write stuff out, give it to somebody else and say, am I on the right track? Does this make sense? And that can be just a good motivational as well as just a very powerful tool to save some time and revision, keep you moving. Makes you a little bit accountable if you can have this kind of this exchange of material. I particularly find this useful if you can find 2 people who are doing dissertations basically at the same time, something of the same subject. If you can kind of regularly check in with each other, let's say once a week, and just say, where's your progress so far? You send me your paper, I'll have a look, I'll give you a couple of pointers about which direction to go, and the other person does the same. Maybe every 3 days might even be better, especially if you're running out of time. Speaking of time, don't wait until the last minute. To be in a rush just invites so many mistakes, and it will basically reduce the quality of any kind of work that you do. So take your time, set aside the time to be writing regularly, and you won't feel like you're rushing. Now, I get it. Some of us, we really like to procrastinate. I'm a great procrastinator. And if that's a problem for you, that you need that time to just be running out so that the pressure and the stress is so great that you have to write. Finally, you're forced to write. You may need to use a couple of tricks in order to make sure that those deadlines aren't barreling down on you at all times.